2, 1. Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Lagerquist. I'm here at Vine Faith in Action in Mankato. We work primarily with folks 65 and older, but we also have a good representation in the community with all ages. And about a little over a year ago, I connected with Thad, who had just done a mental health spot on KEYC TV. And we had a chance to sit down in his office and come up with a lot of topics for discussion. So when we were starting to approach the end of the main pandemic period, I dropped him an email and he graciously accepted to do a program here again on his spring break. The last day of spring break for MSU is today. So Thad is with the College of Allied Health and Nursing, I believe. Am I correct with that? Mm-hmm. And he's going to speak a little bit about the psychological impact that going through a situation such as the pandemic can have on people, and maybe some ways we can help recognize it. And I know he concentrated a lot on resiliency in his previous presentation. So I know that'll be part of the presentation again today. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to ask them. You don't have to put up your hand or anything, but just be respectful of a break in his speech. So with that, I'll step aside. Thad Shunkwiler, please take it over.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. And a very warm welcome to everyone who so graciously has decided to join and learn something about I'm super passionate about on a Friday afternoon in the spring when we finally get some sunshine out there. I'm coming to you live from my office in Minnesota State University. I wish we were in person, to be honest. I really yearn for the days in which we can all get back together and, collaboratively learn together in a classroom. And Mike is correct. The last real in-person presentation that I have done was a year ago, almost to the day, for Vine, when we talked about a similar topic, but not involving COVID, at least at that point. And so, yeah, I'm really happy that you're here. As Mike talked about, I welcome questions. And in fact, you don't want this to be an hour-long lecture, me talking at you. In fact, this is going to be much better if we participate together and kind of talk together about some of these topics. And my goal for today is to not only educate you on kind of what's going on more kind of globally and nationally with mental health and COVID, but really the key takeaways are what you can take with you and incorporate into your own lives or the lives of your family members, or maybe in your profession, as I recognize some of the names on the call today as some colleagues I used to share in social services. And so I'm so glad that all of you can be there. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. But as I said, by all means, if you have a question, feel free to just say, hey, Thad, I got a question, and we can take a moment to address that. And I've also set aside some time at the end. And so if you prefer to kind of wait and see if we get to maybe something you're interested in, we can do that as well. So either way, I'm comfortable with. All right, here we go. I'm going to pull up my screen and everyone can see the full PowerPoint, right? Everyone can see that now?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, so as Mike said, who I am, I'm Thad Shunkwiler. I'm a professor in the Department of Health Science at Minnesota State University, Mankato. I've been in this role here as a faculty member. This is my 6th year at MSU, which is crazy to think about. It seems like I just started it a few days ago. But my background is actually a behavioral health professional. And so I'm a clinician by training. And so my work prior to coming into education and teaching was in treating people with mental health disorders. And I've worked in a variety of settings in and around the Mankato area, from the state hospital in St. Peter to community mental health clinics, like Sioux Trails Mental Health Centers. And then also I was the provider in the jail systems for Blue Earth County, Nicollet County, and a number of the smaller counties in the area. And so my background is very heavy in kind of mental health and behavioral health, but my research focus at the university has really kind of been more into like big picture trends and looking at things like workforce and different issues. And so this really fits what I've been interested in, because it's a trend, like what's going on in the world of mental health. Well, everything is really focused on COVID-19 right now. I guess the other quick thing I'll say about myself is I live in North Mankato. We welcomed newborn twins. We have twin baby boys that came and joined us right after my presentation at Vine last year. So they're coming up on their year birthday. And if COVID-19 wasn't enough stress in my life, having two twin babies has added a considerable amount of joy to our lives, but also a considerable amount of stress. And so that's me. Typically, when we're in a classroom, I like to go around and meet everybody. I know over Zoom, it can be challenging to do that just because, you know, I don't necessarily know who everyone is based on what their IDs are on here. And so if you're interested in sharing who we have in the room, the chat feature works great. You know, maybe just say hello. I saw we had Natasha say hello earlier, but that's one way I think we can all at least see who's in the room today. As I mentioned, it's a very brief training today, right? We just have a little over an hour together. And so I really tried to pare this down into kind of 3 consumable objectives or things that I hope that you can take with you. And so we'll start big picture and looking at kind of what are the large scale impacts that COVID is having on psychological well-being and what are the numbers suggesting? And we'll talk about kind of why that is important. I'm not going to give you a ton of statistics and overwhelm you with them, but I think it's important for you to kind of know what the big picture is saying, because that's really going to influence not just the here and now, but in the several years to come. And then I really want to focus the bulk of our presentation on what are we going to do about it? And what is the only way that we're going to get through the second pandemic? As Dr. Fauci was quoted saying just a few days ago, that his fear is that there's going to be a second wave epidemic, which will be the mental health epidemic that follows this past year. And so how are we going to get through that? And I'll give you some strategies that that we know work and that are very practical, things that you all can start doing as soon as this presentation is over. And I'm going to challenge you to do one of those things today. So I would like to open it up, though, with a general question and to just hear from you all. In what ways has this pandemic impacted your well-being? I've done this presentation a handful of times now to different groups and organizations. And so I'm always interested in hearing from people in what ways their own well-being has been impacted. So if you're comfortable, please unmute yourself and just share in what ways you've been impacted.
Well, I'll start. I just know that I've been more emotional. I think there are days when I'm really high, really up there, and then it could be the next day or the day after that I'm just scraping myself off the ground trying to get into work. And I just find that as a kind of a repeating cycle that you have to recognize and try to power through.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. So yeah, you've noticed the swings in how you're feeling maybe are more pronounced in our current environment than maybe they would have been a year ago. So yep. Thank you. Other people who are interested or who are willing to share.
I would say myself, physically, the impact has been pretty good. I've done a lot of taking care of myself, like getting exercise and changed my eating habits some, but at the same time, I find things at home are just kind of like sometimes almost at a standstill. Nobody's going to come to my house to see it, to see what I've done, what I haven't done. And so sometimes I just feel like I'm not getting anything done at home.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. So you've noticed some positive things, right? You've mentioned maybe eating a little bit better, being more mindful about that, even some physical activity, but you're also noticing that something's missing. And the connections that maybe you would have normally had is missing, and that's having an impact.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary. Anybody else willing to share? I'm very curious of how people have been impacted by the pandemic.
Hi, it's Renee Mosier. My impact has been less taking care of myself less with weight gain and sitting 90% of the day, versus probably about 50% when I was going to the office every day. Just really kind of hibernating through the winter, much more so than normal. So I have to do what Mary's done and get my butt moving.
Thank you, Renee. I mean, you're not alone in that, right? I mean, that is a very common, issue that people have dealt with, is that we've been more sedentary, we've been more isolated and have stayed home and, haven't gone to the mall and walked around, or many people aren't even going to the grocery stores. And we kind of even take that and like, we don't even acknowledge that when we go to the store, at least we're walking through the different aisles. And I mean, I think that has been a big part of people's well-being this past year. And so I definitely appreciate you sharing that. And thank you. Anybody else get one or two more thoughts about how it's been impacted, how your lives, well-being have been impacted?
Well, I can speak for Lindsay Stenger, who put something in the chat. She's from the Nicot County Adult Mental Health and Adult Protection. And I can relate to this. I would say the motivation to do things has decreased the more I'm stuck at home. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of, well, I have to stay home anyways, I can't go. It just becomes, okay, we're not going to do that. And then you get into these patterns of not being active or not, pushing yourself. And then that you kind of get stuck in that rut. And I'll share from my own. I mean, this year has been extremely hard on me. And, I try to wade through, is it the fact that we got two little babies at home? Is the fact that my wife tries to, have her own career and I'm trying to work through my career? I try to figure out, where is it really coming from? But there is a bulk of it that I can attribute to the pandemic. And I don't know about you all, but I need people. I'm a people person. That's why I got into helping people, because that is what fills my cup. And my cup has been empty this past year. And there's no other way to say it. And that has had a lot of negative impacts on just my outlook, my positivity, my, I miss my friends. I have found myself over this past year, maybe more irritable, maybe a little bit more on edge. And I think back and I try to reflect on what that means. And it's the fact that I'm alone. I'm alone and there's no one around. I don't have students. I don't have colleagues. And for some of you, you've had that similar experience where your job has shifted and changed, or your family life has shifted and changed. And don't get me wrong, I love being home with my family, but my friends and my coworkers, they're a big part of my life and well-being as well. And that piece has been missing. And so it's important for you to just be able to reflect and think, in what ways has this past year changed? Because in order for us to kind of make positive changes, in order for us to kind of see where it is we want to be, we have to fully understand, or at least understand to a point, kind of where are we currently at? What's currently bothering us? And so I want to kind of jump into, what has been the overall trend of how COVID has impacted psychological well-being. And I use psychological well-being and mental health kind of in a very similar fashion. The one difference, I guess, is all of us have a psychological well-being. All of us have mental health. But I think oftentimes when we use the word mental health, we think in very clinical terms and very, pathological terms like diagnoses and things like that. And I think it's important to know that most people going through this pandemic have been negatively psychologically impacted, but don't have a mental health disorder as a result. Now, a growing number of people have, but I think it's important to acknowledge that we can experience a negative situation and not pathologize it and call it a mental health disorder. But I use those words kind of interchangeably throughout my presentation, but psychological well-being is my preferred word because, again, I think we all can relate to that in ways that maybe we can't all relate to mental health or mental health disorders. But I just wanted to see how much information was out there on this topic. So a few days ago, as I was preparing for this, I went to Google and I typed in COVID impact on mental health, and I had over 700 million hits in under a second. And the reason that's so fascinating to me is that if we had done this same search a year ago, it probably would have rendered 0 So, I mean, this topic is brand new. It is very in its infancy stages of what we really know and understand. But you can tell just by the number of stories and the number of internet hits that this has, it's a very big topic. In fact, you can't open up the paper. You can't watch the news without some discussion about COVID and its impact on mental health. I mean, it is nearly a daily occurrence that we're talking about this and acknowledging some of these things. So I promise I won't bore you completely with stats, but I went out and I found some statistics that I think are important for us to really understand. And these are statistics of Americans from the Centers for Disease Control. And these are the percentages of Americans that are feeling certain symptoms since last year, in the past year. You know, how many Americans are experiencing things like being irritable and having increase in anger? And you can see pretty much across the board, we're seeing a worsened psychological well-being, that people are feeling more emotionally exhausted. And I think that goes to what Mike was talking about earlier, the highs and the lows, and that just how exhausting that feels, that we have optimism when things are going well with the numbers, and then we get pessimistic when they're not going well, and we have to turn the dials back, and there's this constant, you know, go forward and come back, and that just exhausts people. For parents, for those of you on the call who are parents and have kids who are going to school then not going to school, and distance learning and then not, and all of those things take a toll, and Americans are exhausted. We're exhausted in ways in which we've never been before emotionally. If you think about this pandemic and what separates it from a lot of the other like traumatic experiences or difficult experiences our country has gone through in the past, let's say 40 years, right? Like 9/11. If I think about a big national crisis that impacted all of us, 9/11, it happened in a day, right? And we spent years picking up the pieces, but the kind of acuity of it was very fast and very much right away. This thing has been a slow burn for an entire year. And sometimes it gets hotter when the numbers go up, and sometimes it comes back down. But it's something that we continue day in, day out, deal with. And that separates it from things like 9/11 or even, you know, other just national disasters that we experience across this country. But if you look across these things, I mean, how many of you, and you don't have to admit it out on this call, but just look at some of the things that we're measuring. Things like not sleeping well, or being more angry, or feeling guilty or irritable. I mean, reflect on your own experience and just see if that fits for you. And it doesn't fit for everybody. I've talked to people who have found themselves doing better as a result of the pandemic, right? So I don't want to paint this picture that everyone is doing worse, because there are people who have found ways to make this a positive and found ways to reconnect with their family or to maybe work a little less. And so I'm not saying across the board, COVID's impact has all been negative on psychological well-being, but the numbers don't lie. The numbers paint the picture that people overall are not doing well. And what's concerning for someone like me is we weren't doing well before COVID hit, right? I mean, there were a lot of problems our country was experiencing. Our life expectancy was decreasing as a result of psychological issues like drug overdoses and suicides. And that was before we added the stress on from COVID. And so I just want to make sure everyone knows, just it is bad. It's not all bad, but these are kind of the things that we're seeing across people in this country. The other area in which I want to make sure that we touch on is the intersection of like work and COVID, because that's been a big change for lots of people, right? I mean, yes, our social lives have changed, but our employment has changed dramatically. Mike and I were chatting before. He stayed home for a few weeks before he could come back to work. You know, I teach almost completely online. I haven't seen a student in my office or hardly any students in my hallways for nearly a year. And lots of your employment has changed as well if you're working. And so one of the things that I look at is like, how are people feeling emotionally at work? And it's no surprise, but people are feeling the stress and anxieties and sadness, not just at home in their social lives and their personal lives, but also in their professional lives. And so these are some numbers out of a Kaiser Institute study that just was released a few weeks ago, that basically what they've said is that, you know, for 7 out of 10 employees, this is the most stressful time in their entire careers. And that employees are just feeling this added stress and added pressure from what's going on here. The one thing that I think is super interesting to me, right? So what this study did was they asked people like, well, what would make work better? What would make you feel better? And nearly every person who was interviewed or responded to the survey said, you know, if my employer paid more attention to mental health, that would make things better. And they even asked questions like, what's going to keep businesses open, right? A lot of businesses are struggling right now for lots of different reasons. And one of the things that they've said was employers will stay open if they tend to the mental health of their employees, that we have to recognize that people are struggling and we have to do more from an employer-employee standpoint. And so everyone is saying that pretty unitedly, but the sad reality is only about 1/3 of employers are actually doing that. They're actually putting their money where their mouth is and offering increased, you know, access to mental health services, or being at least acknowledging some of the added stresses that are going into it. And so that's important to me because when we talk about like emotional well-being, it's intrinsically tied to financial well-being, which is tied into employment. And so we're having like this perfect storm of like this emotional stress and this financial stress kind of coming together in a way that we haven't seen before. And that's going to continue, you know, this conversation and really kind of push this epidemic of mental health issues further into the future. Now, maybe some of the most concerning statistics and scary, and I promise it's not going to be all doom and gloom. We're about to shift gears and get into some positivity, I promise, right? Because I'm not trying to just scare everyone into how bad this is. But what we're seeing in relation to substance use, so people using drugs like alcohol or even illegal drugs, street drugs, right? We're seeing an increase that we have never seen before. The amount of people who are choosing to deal with this added stress and pressure with a drug like alcohol. And the reason I bring that up is really twofold. We know the consequences of relying on a drug like alcohol to deal with our stress, right? It generally makes us feel better for the moment, right? Nothing reduces a little anxiety like a happy hour glass of wine or a beer. But what we also know is that those substances actually increase symptoms like anxiety and depression over the long haul. And so if we've been using these coping strategies like drinking alcohol and using other drugs to get through this, it's actually going to create more problems. And this is really where, you know, if you saw the newspaper article today, I was talking with the reporter yesterday, and I basically said, the reason I'm so passionate about this is because we are going to be vaccinated. We are going to have all of the physical health ailments, those pieces we will have wrapped up tight. We will have treatments, we will have vaccines, and then we will still be dealing with the mental health struggles of this past year. Meaning the problems that we're going to face from this pandemic psychologically are going to far outlast the physical problems from this pandemic. And this is exactly why I said that. Things like drinking. So I'll just kind of paint a picture quickly here. If you're choosing to use alcohol to cope with all of those added stressors, right? That insomnia, the added irritability, the sadness, the, you know, missing people, and all of those things, if we're choosing to use alcohol, there's going to be a scary percentage of those people who, even when we get a sense of normalcy back, won't stop using alcohol to those capacities. No one becomes an alcoholic overnight. Nobody has one drink and is an alcoholic. Nobody has a month's worth of drinks and becomes an alcoholic, at least not clinically. It takes time for these issues to manifest. And that's why I say we are going to be picking up the pieces from this for years, not just months, but for years, because there are going to be certain individuals who are not going to come out of these patterns, and we're going to have to provide the treatment to help them get through some of those substance use issues that really started as a result of the pandemic. The most concerning statistic of all, though, is the suicide rates in this country. And I think it's a bit of a, we're not really talking about it, at least enough. When I look at all of the stories about mental health and COVID, very few actually talk about the scariest statistic, which is the increase in suicidal thoughts, which have increased, completed suicides. And we've seen the suicide, people seriously considering suicide jump up 11% in this past year. And that may not seem like a very big number, but it's extremely large. I mean, that is a big group of people who are thinking about ending their lives. I think maybe where it's most concerning for me is with young people. We've seen an increase in adolescent suicide attempts in numbers and in cases that we've never seen before in the history of collecting this information. And it makes sense. Our young people are feeling these same pressures that we are feeling, and they're doing it often alone, even more alone than you and I are doing it, because they're not connecting with their friends at school, or they're not connecting to the activities that they historically have. And so that is super concerning to me, is the suicidality and the rates that we've seen there. So I think I've done a good enough job of painting doom and gloom, right? It would be a shame to end it right here, right? Because then you would say, what's the point, Thad? Why are we even having these conversations if it's all bad? And I'm here to tell you it's not all bad, but it's going to take an active and concerted effort by all of us to get through this, right? So I pose the question, like, what can we do? If I just spent the last 25 minutes telling you how bad it is, we have to spend just as much time, if not more, talking about, well, then what are we going to do about it? One thing academics like me are really great at doing is pointing out problems. One thing that we're not very good at doing is telling people how to solve them. And so when I got into academia, I said, well, no, we got to make sure we not only spend time researching the problems, but also then talking about what are the solutions. But I'm curious to hear from you all. What do you think we can do? And there's no magic answer to this, but every answer is a good answer. But like, what are we going to do? I just told you how bad it is. What can we do as a society, as a community, as a family? What can we do to get through some of the things that I spent time talking to you about?
Well, I will tell you that I'm of the mind that there's going to be a big creative renaissance that takes place, because number one, there are a lot of people who have not been able to participate in that as they have in the past. But I also think that it's been an opportunity, an introspective opportunity for people to take a look at themselves and the world around themselves and figure some stuff out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no time like a bad time to try to do some self-reflection and figure out, what do you want your life to look like? So excellent. Thank you, Mike. Anybody else have a thought about it? There's no right or wrong. Well, I'll give you some ideas.
Okay.
The other thing I want to point out is, the physical ailment, like the first part of COVID, we had this, like, we were able to say, well, somebody else is going to fix this problem for us, right? We kind of said, well, the pharmaceutical companies will develop a vaccine and a treatment for this, and our government and politicians will do things and set policies to keep us safe. And we kind of had this reliance on, this is somebody else's problem to deal with, and we will just do what we're told. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's kind of how we approached the first 6-7 months of this pandemic. I'm here to tell you that we will not be waiting for a bipartisan answer to solving the mental health epidemic that is about to follow this pandemic. We can't wait on Pfizer to develop some new medicine that's going to help us kind of turn this thing around rather quickly. And so that's a double-edged sword. It's a bad thing because that puts the responsibility on us, but that's also a good thing because we're not waiting on someone else. We don't need our politicians to get along and agree on what the best way forward is, because I'm here to tell you the only way forward through the challenges and distress that we're experiencing as a result of COVID is what we can do individually and what we can teach our family members and what we can teach our grandkids and what we can do for one another is really the only way through. And that gets me excited because I know we can do it. I know we can push through these challenges. So that brings me to how we're going to get through it. And it's the topic of resilience. And resilience is a buzzword, right? It's been talked about a lot lately, but I want to tell you that I've been using this word long before it became a buzzword. And so part of my background, I guess I didn't share, was I was in the military for a number of years. And when we got home from overseas, our combat deployments, you know, we struggled, and there was alarming rates of suicide with service members, and unfortunately a rate that still continues today to some extent. But what the military immediately started doing was talking about resilience and how people can push through those adverse events. And so I've been talking about resilience for about 15 years at this point. And so it's a topic that I'm super familiar with, but it's a topic that is, again, it's the only way through this is to develop resilience. And you might be asking, well, what is resilience? If we were in person, and maybe not in that fancy Vine building, but maybe in one of my classrooms, I explain resilience as taking a tennis ball in one hand and an egg in the other. And when I used to talk about resilience, I said, we're all one or two of these things or somewhere in between. And I would drop them. And obviously the egg would go splat and the tennis ball would bounce back up. And I explained that resilience is within that continuum, that some of us, when something bad happens to us, we splat and we don't bounce back. And for others of us, when something bad or something stressful happens to us, we have the ability to kind of bounce back and get back up. And that is what resilience is. It's in the face of these kind of adverse situations, we can push through them. We can find our way through them. Maybe not to be, you know, like perfect on the other side, but we have the strength, the fortitude, the coping ability to kind of push through these events. I think it's also important to talk about what it isn't, you know, right? Because resilience isn't like this bulletproof vest that means you're never going to experience a difficult situation. That's not it at all. If we could develop some sort of psychological armor that would prevent you from ever feeling stress or sadness or grief or any of those kind of negative emotions, I'd be doing much bigger presentations, right? But it's important to note that this doesn't mean that you won't go through difficult things. So resilience isn't the absence of these challenging times, but rather it's the ability to kind of work through them. And for the longest time, we believed that resilience was just something either you had or you didn't, right? That it was kind of like athletic skill. Either you're an athlete or you're not. Unfortunately, I got the not side of things, right? I'm not very athletic, but there are plenty of people who are. And so we thought for the longest time that's how resilience worked. Either you were born with it and you had it or you didn't. But over time, as we studied it, we learned that no, people can actually learn the steps of resilience, that it's something that can be built within people. There's not a genetic component. I mean, there's a small genetic component that plays a role, but ultimately we can build the resilience to withstand these challenging and difficult times. And yeah, I mean, I think that's optimism, right? Because we can do it. We can kind of work through it when we have it that way. It's important to know, though, that resilience doesn't happen as a virtue of going through something challenging. I called out Tim Crone, the Free Press reporter, a few weeks ago. Maybe you saw that in the paper. He wrote an article. I mean, I have nothing against Tim Crone. I read his article every Sunday. I think he's a terrific writer. But he wrote an article that said, well, our kids are going to be better because they've gone through this challenging time, and they're going to be more resilient. And what he was inferring was that simply just going through this is going to make them stronger. And I wanted to point out as a professional, and I just wanted him to know that that's not how resilience works, that it's an active process. We have to learn resilience. It's not just by, okay, we went through this terrible thing and now we're better for it. There's a process that has to go into it. And I'm here to talk about how we build some of those processes today. So here's how we build it. Now, we build it differently depending on who we're talking about. Now, if I was doing this presentation to an elementary school or a middle school or even a high school, there'd be some differences in here. I really thought about who the audience is today in the backgrounds and who you are and what you bring and what might be most beneficial, because there's entire textbooks on building resilience. I could teach a whole semester's long class on doing it. We don't have that, right? We got a half hour. So I really wanted to focus on some tangible things that you all could do, that you could start doing immediately, that you don't have to buy a book, you don't have to join a club, you don't have to do anything other than just be mindful about how you integrate some of these things into your lives. And so we're going to go through kind of how we build resilience. So the first thing, which is going to be a bit of a paradox given our current situation, is building connection, prioritizing relationships. The most resilient people are people who have strong relationships. We live in a world today, or young people for sure live in this world where they have thousands of friends, right? They got thousands of followers. They got hundreds of Facebook friends. Ask your grandkids, ask your kids about how many friends they have. But what's really sad is when you ask them, okay, so you have 1,000 Instagram followers, but how many of those people would come over to your house if you were in the middle of a crisis? How many of those 1,000 people? And sadly, it's a very small number. It's definitely a lot smaller than 1,000. And in too many instances, it's actually zero. That we think we have all of these friendships and connections, but we don't have those strong relationships. That's really missing. And so in building resilience, we have to prioritize those relationships. We have to strengthen those relationships, which, think about it, in this past year has been impossible. And in fact, we have been grown more distant in our relationships because we haven't been able to have that get together, that class reunion, that after work get together, our family reunions, our holidays. We have been distanced from that. So I'm begging people, as allowed, we have to prioritize bringing that back together. We have to say, you know what? It's been great not seeing Aunt Beth and Uncle Jimmy this past year, right? Because they're just a headache when we get together. But I'm here telling you that that's going to be the most important step in reducing those numbers, those negative psychological numbers, right? Is we have to bring people back together and prioritize those relationships. And you all know what that looks like for you. You all have that person that you've not been able to be with or relate with this past year because of COVID. How are you going to start integrating that person back into your life? And how do you expand those relationships? What are some new opportunities that you can have in your life? Is it joining a new group? Is it joining or rejoining an old group that maybe took some time off? I'm guessing that Vine is very eager to start bringing people back when it's safe to do so, right? But it's easy to say, oh, I'm just not going to do that. Someone had mentioned in the chat earlier, I can't remember who it was, but just your motivation is waning. You have to want to do those things. And COVID has provided an excellent excuse not to do them. Do you think that's just magically going to go away when you get vaccinated? Like that you're just going to get a vaccination and you're going to be like, I'm super motivated to go back and do those things. It's not going to work like that. You have to make it a priority. Johan Hari, a terrific researcher, someone who I look up to and consider a mentor and even, colleague. He basically did this years-long study looking at, why people become addicted to drugs. And his conclusion at the end of it was not based in some medical model or disease model, but he basically said, people use drugs because they want to feel connected to something. And basically said the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's actually connection. And I think that's just not true in addiction, but in any of those negative psychological kind of experiences that you're having from COVID. When we connect with people, that is the antidote that we need. That when we get with people, that is going to help us feel better and develop the resilience to push through some of those things. Fostering wellness. And Mary talked about this. I'm so happy Mary brought this up earlier, but you got to take care of yourself. This pandemic has been a great excuse to, stop going to the gym. I was a really good gym goer. I won't say I was like awesome, like I didn't go every day or anything, but I went a few times a week. But guess what happened when the gyms closed? You couldn't go. What do you think I did when they opened back up? I didn't go, right? Because it was too easy to say, well, that part of my life is, I don't have to do that anymore. It's just one more stress that I have to add. But what we know in building resilience and pushing through these adverse effects is that you got to take care of your body. So stress has an impact, not just psychologically, but also on the physiology of our bodies. And if we take better care of our bodies, our stress levels will go down. And it's easier said than done. How many times have you been told to exercise, right? Eat better and exercise. It's the advice that we all know and is one of the most challenging things to follow, because when we're stressed out, it's easy to just open a bag of chips and binge on Netflix than it is to go for a walk and some of those things. And so I'm telling you that, though, that just like prioritizing relationships, prioritizing taking care of yourself physically is another way that you can build resilience, and encouraging those people who are struggling around you. Okay, what are you doing to take care of yourself? Encouraging that thing will also help push people through resilience. Mindfulness is another strategy. It's not my cup of tea, right? I can't turn my brain off. It's just a deficit that I have. It comes from the military. There is no time in my mind where I can be mindful. So it doesn't work for everybody, but we know the research is very clear that if you can get into this place of mindfulness, of meditating, and if you struggle with it, working with somebody who might help you get there, those are other ways in which we can foster wellness and take care of our bodies and being still. I'm just not the right person to give that presentation. Lots of people I can refer you to, Mike, to have the next presentation being on mindfulness, but it's not me, because it doesn't work for me. And so I've just really never picked it up and helped people do it. One of the things that, again, I think you can all start doing right now and has been shown to help foster resiliency and develop psychological strength is to find purpose. And it's been hard to find purpose this past year, but I can tell you what, those who have are doing better as a result. I guarantee you, well, I don't want to say I guarantee, but if I were betting, I would bet the people who spent the pandemic, with, volunteering and finding a purpose and helping others are not those people who have developed those negative psychological symptoms. Now, again, not everybody, but when we find purpose and when we dedicate parts of ourselves to helping others, we feel better. I'm telling you, it's crazy that when we help other people, we in turn feel better for it. And so there's been a lot of opportunities to help people. And I'm not talking about donning a mask and going into the emergency department and helping there, right? For lots of you in here, your purpose is not going to be on the front line. Your purpose is not going to be putting yourself in a position where you can contract the virus yourself. But there are other ways in which you can work toward finding purpose and giving back. And we often think about, we'll do that in retirement. And many of you on this call are likely in retirement, right? I mean, that's kind of Vine's demographic, is kind of that age group. So this may be something you're already doing, but I'm here to tell you, you have to then teach that to your kids and to your grandkids. Teaching them to find purpose and the value of helping other people will help them psychologically. It's just, we know that giving, that helping people and finding purpose is powerful in developing resilience. Self-discovery. I think we've all had a lot of time this past year to do some of that, right? Reflecting, being isolated, being home. Some of the hustle and bustle of our lives was taken from us. And we can look at that as a detriment. We can say, well, I don't get to go see my grandkids' basketball games. I don't get to go to coffee hour. I don't get to play cards anymore. Or you can change that and you can say, but I get the opportunity to do some self-reflecting, where before I would just say, I don't have time to do that because I have all these other things. You can use this time purposefully to locate that sense of self, figure out what is it that's missing from, that you want to do. I'll give an example from myself. I really like cooking, and this pandemic has given me an opportunity, some purpose to take up and try cooking things that maybe I wouldn't cook before. Now, my wife probably isn't going to ask me to bake anymore, but I gave it a good shot, right? but I did get better at, grilling and doing some smoking and different things like that. And so you can look at some of this challenging time as a deficit, or you can try to find opportunities for self-discovery and finding some purpose. But I think that's a big piece of it.
Excuse me, Thad?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, do you think, and maybe I'm just looking for a way to compliment Minnesotans here, but that Minnesotans might have a better chance at resiliency because we kind of go through this, hunkering down and self-isolation most every year for 3 to 5 to 7 months. And then when we come out, we do that self-discovery and all of that.
I do think Minnesota, just nationally, when we look at rankings and trends, Minnesota is often ranked at the top when it comes to well-being, physical well-being, but also psychological well-being. Part of that is our seasonal nature in how we have to go through the ebbs and flows and the ups and downs of the 20 below days below zero. And then the, just the extreme high humidities in the summer. And that builds resilience because we kind of work through some of that. So you're right in that respect, but also just our culture, our Minnesota culture of, we're connected. In Minnesota, we always get that Minnesota nice knock, and I get that. We're a bit passive aggressive when it comes to certain things, but I'll also put Minnesota up against anyone and anywhere when it comes to giving and helping and coming to the aid of our fellow Minnesotans. And so that culture and that identity that we kind of hold as people from Minnesota, I think lends itself for us to be in a better psychological place. And the numbers pan out that way, but we're not perfect and we can always improve. But yeah, I think you're exactly right with that. There's a couple more left on this building resilience, right? But one of the other things that I think is important to be mindful of and to think about is how we think about the pandemic. I mentioned it just before. We can look at this past year as a deficit. We can. It's easy to. I do it all the time. What have I missed? Who have I missed being with? And we can create that psychological space where this has been a very negative experience. But then we're going to grow negative psychological feelings from that. I think about it like a garden, right? If we spend our time watering the weeds instead of the flowers, what's going to grow? What's going to grow in your garden if you spend more time putting the water and attention on the weeds than you do the flowers? And it seems obvious, like, well, why wouldn't we do that? But we're all guilty of kind of focusing in on the bad and the negative. And it gives us opportunities to complain about it and not be happy about it. And if you turn on the news, nobody's happy about anything, right? The left, the right, the up, the down, it doesn't matter. Nobody's happy. And that fosters that negative place where it makes sense that people are irritated and sick and tired and exhausted, right? Because our psychological mind space is just full of that negativity. So I would challenge each of you to use that mantra of watering the garden. Every time you drop some water on a weed, I challenge you to find 3 flowers to water. If you think, okay, well, I don't get to do this because our governor says we can't do it, right? Or we don't get to do this because my cousin won't do this, whatever the issue is, then find 3 things that are a positive from this. And I'm telling you, that subtle shift in your mind does wonders. I used to do some parenting classes. I know I have a long list of things I used to do. It's kind of crazy, but for a couple of years, I was working on this parenting project where basically we were measuring like how happy parents were. And most of the time when parents were unhappy, their reasons were because of their kids, right? Their kids didn't listen. Their kids were bad. And what we did was we tried to train parents to, every time they notice something bad about their child, to then have to come up with 5 positive things. And I'm telling you, it's hard, right? Especially when your kid is using the crayon on the wall, or they're wetting the bed. And there's all sorts of things that we can obviously focus in on our children. But for those parents who took it to heart, that really said, okay, for every time that I say, stop doing that, and they say, well, thank you for doing this, and thank you for doing that, and I'm happy that you did this today, and found 5 opportunities to praise their child, guess what? They were happier at the end of our study. If those who did it we're happier. And I think the same thing, and I get parenting and COVID and living through COVID aren't the same, but I do believe that if we can embrace healthy thoughts, that if we can shift our mindset, even just a little bit, maybe just one for one, every time you find something to complain about, find something to be grateful for or to appreciate a little bit more. You're going to slowly turn some of those dials in your brain. And you do that by accepting change, right? This year, nothing has gone as planned. Your grandkid didn't graduate high school with a fancy graduation ceremony. You missed a wedding that you were looking forward to. Maybe you had someone close to you pass away and you weren't able to provide your respects because of all of the restrictions. There's an endless list of things that have changed that have caused, negative feelings. And the faster and the more that we can accept that and try to seek out those other healthy thoughts, the more quickly that we're going to change this negative cycle that we find ourselves in with our well-being. And that's on us. Governor Walz can't tell us to think happy thoughts, right? I mean, he can tell us we have to wear a mask. He can tell us the bars have to close. I mean, he can do those things, but I'll tell you one thing we can't blame the governor or the president or whomever, it doesn't matter, is how we are thinking. That's one thing that we are responsible for. And I challenge you to just today, even if it's just for today, after the presentation, find a few things that you can appreciate, that you can be thankful for, because that gets us to the most important tool in building not only resilience, but happiness. If you find yourself at a place where you're unhappy, and I'm not talking about depression, we're going to talk about a little bit more of the serious issues before we wrap up today, but I'm talking about just that overall sense of negativity that the pandemic has brought on. Gratitude. And you don't take it from me, but the Harvard Medical School's journals have published results of studies looking at the impact of gratitude. And so we're talking the smartest people, no other way to put it, the smartest people in our country are all saying the same thing, that gratitude is a life changer for people. And gratitude is simply just, it's graciousness, right? It's appreciating what you have. It's being grateful for those things, but also sharing that. I can't stress that piece enough. Sharing gratitude, sharing those things is one surefire way to make you feel better. And I can prove it. There was a study a few years ago, a brain imaging study that looked at people experiencing stress and anxiety. And what they found was that your brain is not capable of feeling gratitude and stress at the same time. It's just not possible. There's no way to do it. So the more you practice gratitude and the more that feeling goes through the neurology of your brain, the less it's possible for you to feel anxious and stressed out and sad, because you can't feel both at the same time. And that's what they try to teach people, is the more we can integrate things like gratitude into our daily lives, the better we're going to feel. You want to change those numbers that I was talking about earlier in our presentation? One surefire way is for us as a community, as a country, to experience and to practice gratitude. And that's something we can do. I give you an example. Writing a thank you note. It's a lost art, right? Kids these days, if you have grandkids, teach your kids to do this, because nobody does this anymore, or very few people do it. And it's an extremely powerful tool. Thanking people is beneficial for you, but also for the recipient. And last year, I challenged this group to doing this, that after today's presentation, find one person in your life that you can write a thank you note to. Who can you, in your mind, maybe somebody that's kind of more recently done something for you, or maybe it's something in your past that you want to show your appreciation and your gratitude. I don't want to toot my own horn, but I did the activity after last year's presentation. So at least one person did it. And I wrote a thank you note to a high school teacher that I had, I won't tell you how long ago, but a long time ago, right? Let's see here, probably about 20 years ago, I had this instructor. And this teacher forced me to join the school play. I didn't want to do it. She basically signed me up and said, you're going to do it. And my life has never been the same. I loved public speaking. I loved performing. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for that experience. And I told her that. I wrote her a letter. I found her in an old school, phone book, online phone book, found her address. Hadn't talked to her since I graduated, but I wrote her this thank you note out of the blue. And she wrote me back and talked about how much she appreciated that. And I'll tell you, my brain was full of good feelings. There's nothing that could have happened that day that would have caused me to feel negativity, right? Because that exchange right there flooded my brain with gratitude and just made me feel better. And the more you can do that, the better you're going to feel. And I'm not saying every day you have to write a thank you note, you have to do those things, but think about ways in your life you can practice more gratitude. Sometimes people talk about like doing a gratitude journal. When I was working with clients in the past, one thing I would challenge them to do is every morning you wake up, find 3 things and write them down. 3 things you're looking forward to doing during the day, and let me know if you feel better. And not all the time, but in lots of cases, people just report back to me and say, you know what? My attitude changed right first thing in the morning. And I had a better day because I was grateful for these opportunities. Doesn't mean you can't be upset or sad about what's going on in the world, but you start your day with those things. And I'm telling you, you will start to feel better. Gratitude. If you remember nothing else from my time today, find a way to practice gratitude and to integrate it in your lives. And maybe more importantly, help somebody else figure that out. Our young people, particularly young people, this is like I said, letter writing is a lost art and thank you note writing is a lost art. There is a lot of ungratefulness among our young people. And I think it sets them up for a negative psychological experience. And the more we can encourage and teach them to practice some of these very same things, the more resilient they're going to be. Because I'm telling you, they're upset. They're upset they missed prom. They're upset their football season was canceled. They are very ungrateful right now, which I understand. I don't think anyone doesn't understand those feelings, but if they don't change that psychological space, we're talking about years of problems that will follow from that. And so intervening and teaching gratitude and building those resiliency blocks in there is one way we can push through this. I want to briefly talk about self-care as the last building block. It's something we all know about. You probably have a Vine presentation on it at some point on self-care, but it's one of the most difficult things that we do is take care of ourselves. Particularly if you're, in a family or work in a setting where, we have some social workers on the call today. I mean, our entire lives is dedicated to helping other people. And the one person we often fail to help is ourselves. And that's true of most people who work in the helping profession. But I'm here to tell you that this is extremely important, that we have to take care of ourselves if we're going to take care of other people. But we come up with lots of reasons why we can't do that. Lots of reasons why we can't eat better, exercise, read a book, do these gratitude things. How can I do all of that stuff if I have to get my kids to school or, virtually help them through school, or I have to be here or be there? How can I do all those things, Thad? And I'm here to tell you that you have to, that you must do those things. It's kind of like riding in an airplane. They tell you this every time you get on an airplane. If the cabin loses oxygen, they're going to drop down an oxygen mask. And whose mask do they tell you to put on first? Yours. And they remind you that every single time you get on a plane, because our tendency is to help other people and to give, to help other people put their mask on. And then what ends up happening is we run out of oxygen ourselves. And so in order for us to better help other people, we have to take care of ourselves first. One of the things in self-care, and this is a much longer presentation on self-care, but one of the things that I think is really important, it's my colleague, Jennifer Longer, and her work really highlights some of this stuff here. And it's kind of about this frustration that we have about the world, about COVID, about not taking care of ourselves. And really what this is about is our expectations. And it goes back to those thoughts that we were having before, that basically frustration is a matter of expectation, that we have these expectations that aren't met in our lives. And then as a result, we become frustrated from that. So frustration is something really we can control based on our expectations, the expectations about the world, maybe Minnesota should open up. Maybe we should have been more like South Dakota, or maybe we should be more like California and have more things closed, or maybe we should do this and maybe we should do that. And I mean, this past year has been full of unmet expectations. It has, and maybe in ways that we've never seen before, given everything that we've gone through this past year with COVID and, you know, the social unrest in Minneapolis this summer, and also the presidential election. I mean, there's been a lot of expectations and a lot of frustration that has followed with that. And one of the things that comes from that is our own expectations. And this is the point of self-care. We have these unrealistic expectations of ourselves that we should jog every night, or we should eat a salad for lunch. And we just do all these things, and we don't do them, we get frustrated, and it becomes a barrier to even getting started in self-care. So what I'm telling you, I guess in a long roundabout way, is self-care really comes back and starting with you and how you think about it, how you envision it. And when you get frustrated or you're not doing self-care, because it's easy not to do it, I challenge you to think about that thought and set a better expectation for what it looks like to take care of yourself. And in fact, I challenge you to also develop a plan. What are you wanting to change? And I'm telling you, people do these presentations and they expect people to change the world. And I'm literally telling you, like, find just one thing. Maybe you want to cut out that afternoon Coke, or maybe you want to cut out the donut for breakfast. I don't know. Find one thing. Start small, and then you can change the world, right? You can't run a marathon until you can run a mile. And so what is the one area in your life do you want to change? What are the barriers to changing that? And then what are you going to do to get through that barrier? It's easier said than done. We could spend the whole hour looking at why we don't do things. But I'm here to tell you that it starts internally. It starts with your own mind space about how you do that. All right. I would be remiss if I did not also talk about the fact that some of the struggle that people go through is very serious, right? We talked about suicidality earlier, substance use, those things, mental health disorders. Practicing gratitude is not going to help somebody through a bipolar episode. Practicing self-care is not going to pull somebody out of a depressive cycle that involves suicide thoughts. So I have to also, as a professional, tell you that there are also times and places and instances in when you need professional help. And so I give you a couple of here to think about, and for yourself or with other people in your lives, if you're seeing these things, right, to a degree that's really impacting people, you need to seek out that professional help, whether that be a counselor. And I'll give you some resources here in a moment of where those places are. But if you're having thoughts of suicide, or other people are, it's not enough to just share my PowerPoint with them. You got to get them to the right help. And that help is, thankfully in our community, we have resources. We have, places in which we can go. And I've listed a few here. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I just found 4 accessible places for our communities. And these are all great people who can help individuals who are maybe not just struggling with the effects of COVID-19 psychologically, but also an underlying issue that just really does require that professional help and guidance. So I've rambled on for about almost an hour here, and I didn't want to do that. But I found myself doing that anyway. So I want to take just, a few minutes to reflect on your thoughts, questions, and it don't have to be a question, but just even statements or things that you thought about as you were listening. Things that make sense, things that don't make sense. I really want to open it up to you all to just have a conversation about some of the things that we learned about the pandemic, as well as some of the ways in which we can overcome some of those issues. So what are your thoughts?
Well, being one who's never afraid to be the first person to speak, one of the things I was thinking about was, if we were at home or we had more time to ourselves, the one thing a lot of us do is fall back on social media. And that is not a place where you're going to necessarily find gratitude. So I found myself on a couple of occasions lashing back at people who disagreed with me. And I felt good about that for about a second and a half until somebody called me on it and said, Mike, that's not like you. That's really a nasty thing that you said. And what I started to try to do then is either engage them in a conversation, a respectful conversation, or in some cases, because he's not here, a second cousin who, anytime I said something politically and he disagreed with me completely, would always just come back the other way and just slam me for my opinion. And instead of going back and forth, I tried the engagement, but I also brought in examples of things. He's a great father. He's a teacher. He's a coach. I knew those things about him. So I tried to turn the conversation to those positive things. And it really helped get through those tough times.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Social media, the news, any of that stuff is, when we're not feeling well, we like to consume things that, much like alcohol or drugs, we consume things that don't actually make us feel better, but end up making us feel worse. And your point to social media is very real. Thank you. Other thoughts?
One thing that I wrote down, and I even underlined it a couple of times, is the part about helping others, because that is something that got me through a divorce, and then the death of my second husband. And now this is, and it didn't have to be, one is a person I just call and talk to. We visit for an hour every week. And it wasn't, some of it's face-to-face, but that's something that's helped me through a lot of things, is just trying to be there for other people.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Mary. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. You then feel better from helping other. And it's easy to do, right? I shouldn't say it's easy to do, but it's something we're all capable of doing. And we don't all need to donate an endowment to somebody's, school, or we don't need to shovel everybody's driveway, but it can be just as small as taking some time to talk with someone, call, prioritize those relationships, help somebody else through that. And that can make you feel better. So yeah, thank you so much, Mary.
I would also say one thing that I've learned more about, that because I'd never done it before all of this, was Zooming. And I know there's a lot of people that say, oh my gosh, they've been through enough Zoom meetings but our coffee group Zooms every morning. We've got a couple from California that Zoom in. We've got a trucker, an over-the-road trucker, that'll Zoom in when he can. And we can visit back and forth. I've seen my grandson's basketball games. I've seen Avex Robotics that one of my grandsons was in. I've done so many of these Vine programs. I love to learn, and I feel like I learned something on just about every one of these. So that's something I hope that I'll be able to continue once everything else is just this Zooming. We just enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mary. Yeah, absolutely.
I know that for myself, I'm the one who coordinates the Vine educational programs, but for a year, I was also in charge of the Kiwanis weekly meeting speakers. And what I found is that we no longer have to rely on people who can drive here during their workday. We can find people who are outside the area and bring them in to even expand the reach for what we've had. And I want to thank Mary. She has been one of those people who is a regular at our programs. And I know that I always appreciate seeing her name on the registration list.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts people have, comments, questions? Who are you going to write your thank you card to? That's a pretty big question right now, right? I found my high school English teacher, so I'm wondering who you're going to think of, to locate and send that card of appreciation or thanks. And I'm telling you, it was 20 years ago she helped me, and I never thanked her then, but it felt really good to thank her, you know, a year ago.
Anybody else? I hope you're not speaking and we can't tell. If you want to unmute yourself, please do.
I don't, one thing I try to do in my day-to-day work, especially with coworkers and during the pandemic, is tell them thank you at the time. Shoot them an email, whatever it is, just to say thank you for your help or thank you for whatever. Or this morning I sent someone a email and said, you know, you're an amazing case manager. She'd worked with a difficult client all day yesterday, moving somebody. And that had to take a lot of patience because that's a difficult client for her to work with. So I appreciated her this morning and let her know.
That is awesome. I mean, that makes her feel better. And hopefully you took some, okay, I can experience gratitude because I'm grateful that I have this coworker to call a coworker and who can help the people who I care about as well. So yeah, thank you, Renee.
One thing that I kind of struggle a little bit with, probably that's the area, is when you were talking, it would be like confusion. And I came to the conclusion when you were making the list that it's, this is with the end of this COVID now. Everybody's excited about it right now. I mean, today, everything is really good. But I feel like my expectations are different from other people's, such as my sleeve was rolled up the minute they said I could get a vaccination. But then I run into people that are going like, I'm not getting I don't have any desire to get a vaccination. I've run into whole families that won't get vaccinated. And I just, my expectations are that everybody's going to feel the same way I do. And then I get kind of confused about how I should react to that with them.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. That expectation is what causes frustration. And you use the word confused, but I'm assuming maybe there's some frustration in there too. Like, well, I feel this here. I see the world this way. How come you don't share those same things? And basically what the research or what clinicians would tell you to do is, if you don't want to feel that sense of frustration, the only way to do that is to change expectations. And that's hard. That's very hard to do.
Yeah. So.
Thank you again.
Anybody else want to pipe in? Maybe express gratitude to Thad for doing the presentation today.
This has been, it's my pleasure, right? This is, I like to do these. I like people to listen to me. I'm a bit of a talker, right? You probably figured that out in the last hour, but no, I think this is really important because I just feel like we are going to miss this issue. Like, it's going to be like one of those issues where we're going to be vaccinated or we're going to open everything up and we're going to think like, okay, we're all back to normal. And I just have this fear that it's going to explode on us and we're going to say, well, we never saw it coming. And if you've ever heard me talk or you continue to hear me talk, you won't be able to say we didn't see this coming, because I try to let people know that if we don't intervene on this now and start changing some things now, that we're going to be picking up those pieces much further down the road. So, but excellent. Oh yeah. And Natasha, yeah, I'll email this out to, you can either email me if you would like a copy. Why don't we do that? Because I don't know if Mike got everybody's email, but either way, my email address is in the chat. And if you just send me an email and say, hey, Thad, can you send me that PowerPoint you did for Vine? I'd be happy to do that. And then I'll also send it to Mike. So if he has your email, he can just send it out to everybody so you have it, maybe whether you wanted it or not.
Right, thank you. Yeah, that's the kind of response I just gave her, so.
Perfect.
And I would say one thing that I came to, late in the process was about just under 4 months ago. I'm a single guy who lives alone. I got myself a dog. And boy, did that make a difference, because not only do I have companionship, but I've got somebody to do stuff for and with. And it made such a big difference for me coming home at the end of the day and having a tail wagging and just somebody eager to see me at the end of the day. So that was helpful.
Yeah, no, I think pets can be a great source of joy and purpose. And for some people, they can also be a source of stress, right?
Yeah.
That's how I feel about my babies. I've had a lot to do this past year. I wasn't bored, I'll tell you that much, but it has been a combination of stress and, purpose, I guess.
I thank God every day for my dog, even though he barks during all of our meetings and drives me crazy. He is what keeps me going during the day. He makes me get up to let him out. He makes me, take him out to chase the squirrel. He just really does so much for me. I couldn't imagine not having him here during this pandemic. I'd have been so lonely.
Yeah. I'll give him a good rub behind the ears today.
He gets that every day, several times.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions or comments, and you've got Thad's email address now too, if you didn't put that down, the code up at MSU is really easy. It's first name dot last name at mnsu.edu. So you can go back to the newsletter if you don't know Shunkwiler. It's the common spelling, but I just want to thank Thad for joining us again, because in both cases of our presentations by him, I've come away feeling better about things, a little better grasp. I think we talked about last time, ignorance can be the biggest detriment to feeling better. So I think just knowing some of these facts helps us feel better about understanding what we're going through. And that is the first step toward feeling better about things. So I want to thank you, Thad, for this. And I'm glad we were able to fill your spring break gap and give you an audience to listen to your ramblings, because they were very, very educational. And we thank you for spending your time with us today.
Yeah, no, thank you all for taking time to come and learn. And I look forward to the next opportunity that we all will have to learn something, and have a great weekend, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, don't forget to spring ahead.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Forgot about that. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.